Remember the hum of cicadas in the distance when it all began to unravel, those tiny insects serenading the night, unaware of the chaos stirring inside my heart. My name is Michael, and if there's one thing I wish for now, it's that I could roll back time and take that first warning sign seriously. Maybe if I had paid closer attention, I would have seen that my wife's smile was not for me alone anymore. Her name is Jennifer, and when we first met, the sun seemed to shine in her hair as though it were spun from gold, but sometimes, happiness has an expiration date we refuse to see. It was easy, in those quiet hours together, to ignore the subtle differences that bloomed like inevitable cracks in a once perfect vase. Even when we made promises beneath the stars, eternal vows, or so we believed, fate was already shaping a different path for us. That it began as a sense of unease I couldn't name. Jennifer started coming home later and later, offering half-hearted excuses that never quite lined up. She had new stories about after-work gatherings, spontaneous dinners with colleagues, or book club meetings that ended suspiciously late. I wanted to believe her, because faith in the person you love is one of those unspoken commandments in marriage. Still, there were oddities. A change in her perfume, one she never used around me. Her phone was always clutched close to her chest as if it hid fragile secrets that couldn't risk the light of day. The sweet note in her voice whenever she answered a mystery call in the next room, it was full of hushed excitement I hadn't heard in a very long time. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself that maybe I was reading too much into these subtle shifts, that I was imagining her sudden need for secrecy. When you love someone, you're prone to writing off warning signs as mere coincidences. You label them misunderstandings, and you hold on to trust like an anchor in a storm. Yet suspicion, once sown, is like a stubborn weed. It grows in the corners of your mind, tangling your thoughts, demanding you look closer. One evening, I found myself seated on our living room couch, waiting for Jennifer. She had left the house at twilight, saying she was visiting a friend. The hours dragged on, and the clock nearly crept toward midnight. Her text messages were strangely delayed, short, and guarded. Then, at last, I heard the jingle of keys in the door. She looked radiant. Yes, radiant. Her cheeks were flushed in a way I hadn't seen since our earliest days of dating. There was a faint glow in her eyes, something that didn't belong to the woman who'd left the house earlier. Instinct clutched at me, warning me that the reason for this glow did not lie in any ordinary visit with a friend. "How was your evening?" I asked softly. She averted her gaze for a second, a moment so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been searching so desperately for answers. "It was fine," she said. "We just talked for hours. She's having some relationship troubles, you know." And there it was, the elaborate story, the carefully chosen words, the details poured onto me as if hoping the extra texture would distract me from deeper questions. My heart twisted. But I listened, quietly, nodding in the right places, because to speak my doubts out loud seemed too frightening. Once spoken, words can never be retracted. So I kept silent. A few days later, I confided in my closest friend, Andrew. We had grown up together, ran through sprinklers in the summer, built treehouses in the backyard, and learned to ride bikes under the watchful eyes of our parents. He was the one who helped me propose to Jennifer, sneaking rose petals into my car, lighting hundreds of tiny candles to create that magical atmosphere. When he saw the worry lines on my forehead, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "I've noticed something too," he admitted, regret tinging his voice. "I didn't want to say it until you brought it up, but Jennifer seems distant. Like she's living in a different universe. Are you sure everything's okay between you two?" And that was enough to break my fragile facade. I poured out all the small clues that had quietly gnawed at me, all the half-truths and convenient disappearances. Andrew listened with the empathy of a lifelong friend, offering reassurance that perhaps it was all a misunderstanding, or a rough patch that would pass with time. But his eyes told me he suspected otherwise, and the weight of his unspoken worries pressed down on my heart. Perhaps neither of us was prepared to face the truth that something was indeed very wrong in my marriage. There are nights when the moon appears so bright it illuminates even the shadows we try to hide. One such night, I couldn't sleep. Jennifer had slipped off to bed early, citing a headache, leaving me alone in the living room. The gentle hum of the fridge, the low buzz of streetlights outside, it all blended into a lonely lullaby that refused to grant me any peace. Compelled by an urge I still can't fully explain, I picked up Jennifer's phone from the kitchen counter. She had left it there by accident, a trust we once promised never to break. My hands trembled. A storm swelled in my chest, because what I was about to do felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet the seed of doubt that had grown in me demanded satisfaction, demanded I find proof, one way or another. I opened her messages. At first, I saw notes to colleagues, a group chat with old college friends, her mother's reminders about upcoming family events. But then I scrolled further. A chat labeled only with an initial, R, and there it was, stark and undeniable. Flirtatious words, secret plans, confessions of longing. My heart thundered. My vision blurred. It was more explicit than I'd feared, though not in any graphic sense, but in the emotional weight of it. They were planning their next rendezvous. They spoke of the rush and the thrill. They mentioned a new place to meet, a corner of town with hidden corners and dim lights, where no one they knew would spot them. I stared at that screen for what felt like hours. My entire world seemed to shrink until only those messages existed, a flashing neon sign of heartbreak and betrayal. Then I heard the soft creak of the bedroom door. Turning around, I found Jennifer standing there, the hallway light forming a pale halo around her. She froze as she realized what I held in my hands. Her eyes widened with a fear that was more telling than any confession. I stood up, phone still in my hand, my voice catching in my throat. "Who is R?" I asked, though I already knew. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for an explanation. She tried to shape her features into feigned indignation, anger that I had invaded her privacy. But the guilt in her eyes burned too brightly. It's not what it looks like," she stammered. "He's just a friend. You're overreacting. We were only talking." "Only talking?" I said, my voice trembling with the weight of her deception. I shoved the screen toward her. "This is more than just talking." She stared at it for a heartbeat, then let out a long, unsteady exhale, as if 1,000 possibilities had just snapped into focus. She mumbled something about loneliness, about feeling misunderstood at home. My head whirled, emotions erupted like fireworks in the pit of my stomach. "Why didn't you talk to me?" I asked, holding back tears. "Am I not your husband? Didn't we promise to face our problems together?" She hesitated, eyes lowering to the floor. "I don't know," she whispered. I felt suffocated. Something was missing, and I didn't know how to say it. Hearing her speak those words was like watching a cherished painting fade before my eyes. I felt powerless, as though no matter how hard I tried, I could never recover the colors that once made our love vivid and whole. The aftermath of that confrontation was a haze of sorrow. I slept in the guest room that night, if you could even call it sleep. Visions of Jennifer laughing with someone else, speaking words of endearment, making secret plans, all haunted my mind. In those lonely hours before dawn, I realized how fragile our entire world had become. It was like living in a house of mirrors, each reflection of my life cracking bit by bit. Jennifer tiptoed around the house the next morning. I saw guilt pressed on her face, her shoulders bowed with remorse, or perhaps shame. But she never outright apologized for what she had done. Instead, she tried to rationalize it, saying I had been distant, that I no longer made her feel desired. Maybe there was some truth in that, I don't claim to be blameless. But it hurt, nonetheless, to hear her twist the blade deeper by implying her betrayal was somehow my fault. Time passed in a slow, disorienting crawl. We barely spoke. We were like strangers, polite and cautious, circling each other with forced smiles in front of neighbors or friends. Then, when the doors closed, we withdrew, each drifting into separate rooms, our conversations reduced to hollow pleasantries about groceries or undone chores. Meanwhile, Andrew checked in constantly, worried about me. He'd call or send messages, inviting me out for coffee, urging me to open up. I hesitated at first. Pride is a strange thing, you fear judgment even from the people closest to you. But eventually, I gave in. I told him the story in its raw, painful entirety, Jennifer's late nights, the suspicious messages, the confession, and our household reduced to near silence. Andrew listened, eyebrows furrowed with concern, empathy lacing his every word. You need to figure out what you want, he said. Don't let her decide for both of you. You're allowed to speak your mind, to refuse to sweep this under the rug. She broke your trust, Mike. I nodded, but in truth, I felt lost. My sense of identity was intertwined with Jennifer. For so long, I defined my happiness by her presence. To imagine life without her felt like stepping into a pitch-black void. My hands still shake when I recall the day I finally met the man behind the messages. It was an accidental encounter, though to this day I wonder if fate orchestrated that moment. I had gone to a local diner for lunch, somewhere unassuming, a place with creaky vinyl seats and a jukebox in the corner that played old love ballads. I was halfway through my meal when a figure approached. Tall, with a confident smile, he greeted the waitress by name, joking about the specials of the day. Then, across the diner, he made eye contact with me. I recognized him from a photograph I had once glimpsed on Jennifer's phone, a group picture at some company event. The initial R from the text messages suddenly had a face. He walked over, likely noticing my glare. His expression shifted, as if he sensed exactly who I was. Michael, he asked, and the sound of my name on his lips made the hair on my arms stand on end. For a moment, neither of us spoke, two men confronted by a single, painful truth. He finally broke the silence. I'm Robert. I suppose, well, I guess we both know what's going on. I studied him. The pang of jealousy and hurt gnawed at my insides, but I also felt a surprising calm wash over me. What do you want? I asked quietly. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never planned on this happening. Jennifer and I it started innocently. We talked about our frustrations with life, with your marriage. She was unhappy. So was I in my own life. One thing led to another. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the turmoil in my mind. The last thing I wanted was to cause a public scene. So you two found comfort in each other, I said, my voice trembling with bitter resignation. Something like that, he admitted. Look, I'm not proud of this. I know it's wrong. If you want me out of the picture, I'll step away. But I think that's a decision Jennifer needs to make. Not me. Hot anger flared in my chest, but it was an oddly muted fury, as if heartbreak had already drained me of my strongest emotions. I watched him gather his courage and walk away. There was no point in chasing him or demanding an explanation, he had nothing left to say that would mend the damage. The truth lay in Jennifer's hands, and if she wanted him gone, she would have to choose that herself. That night, I recounted the surreal meeting to Jennifer. She paled at the mention of Robert's name, and I watched as a dozen emotions crossed her face, shock, fear, sadness, maybe even relief that it was out in the open. We argued, though the argument was softer than you might expect. All my outrage had been spent in those sleepless nights of self-torment. Hers seemed more like a struggle with guilt rather than defiance. She apologized, tears slipping down her cheeks, but the sincerity felt incomplete. A part of her still seemed tethered to the thrill of this new connection, no matter how damaging it was to our marriage. Where do we go from here? She asked, her voice raw. I thought about it. I don't know, I said honestly. You have to decide what you really want. I can't force you to stay or leave. But I also can't pretend this never happened. She nodded, gazing at me through tear-stained lashes. We were like two lost travelers who'd wandered off the same path, uncertain how to find our way back to each other, or if that way even existed anymore. We spent the next few weeks in a tense limbo. Every day felt like it could be our last as a couple. Sometimes, Jennifer would try to reconnect with me, cooking dinner and lighting candles as if to rekindle our old romance. Other times, she would vanish for hours, and I'd spiral into dark thoughts, convinced she was meeting Robert again. We went to counseling once, at my insistence. The counselor's office smelled of lavender and fresh linen, the decor meant to soothe anxious minds. But every question sliced open wounds we didn't know how to heal. Our trust was broken, hers in me, because she felt misunderstood and overlooked, mine in her, for obvious reasons. Rebuilding it seemed an enormous task, like trying to stitch a torn sail in the middle of a raging storm. I found myself journaling, late at night, writing out every thought that consumed me. Sometimes I composed letters to Jennifer that I never gave her, letting my heart pour out onto paper. I wrote about how I wished we could find our way back to each other, but also how deeply she had hurt me. I described the swirl of resentment and love, the duality that kept me up till dawn. One crisp morning, Jennifer approached me in the kitchen. The sunlight streamed through the blinds, reflecting off the granite countertop. She stood there, shoulders tense, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her shirt. "I ended it with Robert," she said, voice trembling. "I told him not to contact me again. That I need to figure out what I really want, and that I want to try again with you." I searched her eyes. Part of me wanted to believe her, to throw my arms around her and whisper that everything would be all right. But another part clung to caution. "Why now?" I asked softly. "Is it because you truly want us to work, or because you feel guilty?" She didn't blink. "Maybe it's both," she replied honestly, tears glimmering in her eyes. I've seen what I was doing, how lost I was. But I remember how we used to be, how we promised to share our lives with honesty. I'm not expecting you to trust me right away. I'm just hoping we still have a chance." We stood in that sunlit kitchen, the air thick with unspoken hopes and fears. I thought about how everything felt at the beginning, our laughter, shared dreams, the plans we made for our future. Could we salvage even a fraction of that? Or was this a wound too deep to heal? Finally, I nodded. "I'm willing to try," I said. "But this can't be fixed overnight. If you're serious, we both have to commit to rebuilding what was broken." Her eyes welled up, and she leaned against the counter for support. We stood there, so close yet burdened by the chasm of betrayal. Healing, like trust, is never instantaneous. In the weeks that followed, Jennifer and I tried to communicate more, forcing ourselves to address the underlying fractures that led us here. Some days, we had glimmers of hope, small shared moments that reminded us of better times. Other days, the ghost of her infidelity haunted me, making me question every word, every glance, every stray smile she offered. I suspect that for many couples, such a betrayal spells the end. But some manage to find a fragile path forward. Whether Jennifer and I can truly repair our bond, only time will tell. The process is painstaking, layered with honesty, vulnerability, and forgiveness, each more daunting than the last. For now, I focus on the present moment, letting tomorrow's battles be tomorrow's battles. I choose, each day, to confront my anger and confusion rather than suppress it. Jennifer, for her part, chooses honesty. She shares her whereabouts, her feelings, her phone if I ask, though I try not to pry. We still see the counselor. We try to share small joys, like cooking a meal together or revisiting the place where we first met. Little by little, we're testing the waters to see if love can truly be reborn in the same place it once died. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I look at the dark rings under my eyes, the lines etched onto my brow. I feel older, weary from the storm that tore through my life. But I also see a faint glimmer of resilience. This ordeal, harrowing as it was, has forced me to confront parts of myself I had neglected. I realize now that in marriage, complacency can be as dangerous as outright betrayal. Jennifer has changed, too. I see it in the way she approaches me, timid yet sincere, as if she knows she can't undo the past but wants to shape a better future. Perhaps she has discovered how easily one can destroy a precious bond with just a few foolish acts. We're both standing on a precarious threshold, uncertain if the next step will lead to solid ground or a plunge into deeper heartbreak. I wish I could say there's a neat, conclusive ending to this story, but life rarely grants us such clarity. The moonlight that once revealed her secrets now shines on a still fragile relationship. The future remains unwritten, a journal with blank pages awaiting our next chapters. Every morning, I make a choice. I choose to greet Jennifer with genuine words, not empty politeness. I choose to be vulnerable with her, to share my thoughts and insecurities, hoping that openness can serve as the glue to mend the fractures. Meanwhile, she chooses to stay home in the evenings, to close off lingering avenues of temptation, to prove her loyalty in small daily gestures. Whether these choices will unite us or if they merely postpone an inevitable goodbye, I can't say. But in the quiet of dawn, when the sun begins to chase away the shadows of night, I find a shred of faith that maybe people can recover from even the fiercest storms.